The Defense Department needs to take a whole-of-government approach to national security, according to the Future Defense Task Force. The bipartisan group recommends faster development of artificial intelligence and unmanned weapons systems. Dov Zakheim, senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, former Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller, and writing about the task force in the Hill newspaper and on thehill.com. Dov, welcome. Thanks for coming on. My takeaway from your piece is that you were less focused on the contents of what the task force found than that the task force found stuff in agreement in the first place. Am I reading you right?
Well, almost. First of all, it's good to see you. Look, there are really two major things here. First of all, as you say, the fact that they could work together is a huge, huge deal in this terribly chaotic environment. No question about it. But second of all, if you actually look at what they said, this is really a map or a guidepost for the next 30 to 50 years. It is a completely different view of what our priorities should be in terms of defense. It lays out whole of government in a very, very different way, I think. It'll talk about immigration. It'll talk about STEM. It'll talk about early education. It is really, as I say, a very, very unusual, provocative, and thoughtful document.
Who should do what with this, Dov? What should happen next beyond what Congress should do to recognize that its members, 8 of its members, have put this work together?
Well, different people need to do different things. I mean, in the first place, you need a White House that understands this and that is willing to farm out to different agencies different responsibilities. In other words, you can't just have the Department of Defense as the default agency for everything to do with defense. Defense is simply much wider than that. So you have to have a completely different attitude to immigration. You have to have science and technology managed differently. Those are different agencies. And of course, the State Department and its diplomacy need to be far more important than they've been in the last few years. All in all, it takes a White House, a concerned White House, and an informed White House to farm out these different responsibilities properly and effectively, and then coordinate them.
Whether that White House is President Trump's second-term White House or President Biden's first-term White House, what are those connections within the executive branch that need to be enhanced and evolved, Dov?
Well, as I said, when you're talking about science and technology, there's clearly a responsibility in the White House itself. They have the Office of Science and Technology. There's the Defense Department, obviously. In some respects, maybe even Homeland Security. If you're talking about beyond science, if you're talking about immigration, that, of course, is the Homeland Security Department and its sub-departments. And so that's a very different area. There's the Department of Education that has to come into this. So as I say, they need to work together, and it's the White House that brings them all together. In other words, instead of just focusing, say, on Treasury with sanctions or on defense with the military or on state with diplomacy, you bring in commerce, you bring in education, Therefore, you're bringing in a completely new set of people that may not have thought of themselves as being essential to national security, or even if they had, never saw themselves playing in that field.
You write something here that I think is especially interesting, Dov. You write, the Defense Department bureaucracy relies far too heavily on consultants and contractors as intermediaries between government and private industry. Where would you like to see that shift to more DoD personnel, whether civilian or uniformed, to make those connections?
Well, on the uniformed side, you have already a structure that would allow for it because you have professional military education. You have nothing like that on the civilian side, really. Now, for PME, as it's called, I think you need to have military people spending some time in industry, spending some time in academia at the highest levels, an MIT, an RPI, a Georgia Tech, a Rice, places like that. So they really understand the technology that they're acquiring. And then, of course, they'll know how to use it in a way that perhaps they might not if they really aren't familiar with what it does. On the civilian side, you've got people who basically come into the government and never take another course in anything. In fact, if they're good, their bosses won't let them go. So we have to have a completely different cultural shift here, where people who want to be promoted understand that the only way they can be promoted to the higher levels is if they have this sort of background, because it's going to be critical. It's what the Chinese are doing. It's what the Russians are doing. They apply all of government. I mean, when we talk about gray zones and gray areas, it's not just little green men. It's stealing technology. It's protecting their own technology. It's getting students out to the United States. In the case of China, we've dropped that ball. We had Radio Free Europe, which was very effective during the Cold War, and Voice of America, and Radio Liberty, and all sorts of other efforts working with trade unions and so on. We've dropped that ball entirely.
We have 30 seconds, Dov. What would you watch moving forward to see if this turns into something actionable or turns into another report that sits on a shelf on Capitol Hill?
Well, the first thing is, let's see what the Armed Services Committees do to demand reports. DOD's flooded with reports, but still to demand timetables, concrete timetables for action to be done along the lines of this report.
Dov Zakheim, great to have you back. Thanks very much.
Thanks to you.